Hello, you're watching the TelecomTV Summit on Private 5G and the Edge. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content. Now, by partnering with vertical sector experts and technology suppliers, CSPs should be able to increase market opportunities and secure a major role in this developing private 5G sector. But which partnerships will prove most successful and how should they be structured? Well, with the help of our guests, we are going to try and find out more. And joining me on the programme today are Beth Cohen, SDN Product Strategies at Verizon, Jose Antonio Aranda, Global Innovation Director for Cellnex Telecom, Susan James, VP Innovation Mobile Connectivity at American Tower, and Robert Curran, Consulting Analyst with Appledore Research. Hello everyone, really good to see you all. Thanks so much for taking part in our discussion as part of this summit today. Now, so far in what's a relatively short period of private 5G, we've seen a very wide range of telco go-to-market strategies, and we're going to explore some of them in a little while. But first of all, a bit of an establishing question, this one. Why do we still believe in the necessity for partnerships in this sector? Beth, could I come to you first for comments?
Sure, happy to talk about it. So partnerships are extremely important in this sector because private MAC, mobile edge computing, and private 5G are really new technologies. They're new products. They're new services. And, telcos are great at networks. We're terrible at applications. And we are really looking to work with partner companies that can provide the holes, if you will, or fill the gaps, providing the applications that our customers are all looking for, as well as, that edge to cloud architecture requires partnerships with the cloud providers as well. So I really see it as an ecosystem that requires partnerships with the cloud providers, the telcos, and the applications companies, as well as the hardware companies as well, because we're developing new hardware to support these edge applications. So it's really, partnerships are essential. We cannot do it alone.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Partnerships are essential. Susan, let me come to you first. It's an ecosystem we're operating in. Do you also see the strength and the necessity for partnerships here?
Absolutely, because the difference between private networks on 4G and then moving into the 5G private networks, it's really very much about solving particular business problems. And the connectivity alone is not going to solve those business problems. As Beth alluded to, it's the applications that are actually solving a true business problem, whether that be, video analytics, whether it be automation. You're going to need companies that are innovating on those application levels over the connectivity that the private networks are going to be providing. So to solve business problems, you're going to need to have multiple parties involved.
Great, thanks very much, Susan. And Robert, we've heard this several times in the summit so far, that it's more than just connectivity when it comes to this sector. Is this why you believe partnerships are a necessity too?
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with those comments. The technology portfolio has expanded. The focus on business outcomes, business problems, is much more to the fore. I think there's another practical reason, which is, Beth alluded to it a little already. Telcos are trusted in certain ways by certain buyers. In the enterprise, we're really looking at a slightly different buyer, a CIO buyer who's used to running enterprise infrastructure. And in that context, there are a lot of other trusted names already in play. So it's not that telcos are looking into a completely greenfield environment on private 5G, the way they might have approached their macro 5G. They're looking at an environment where they are one among many trusted names. And so I think there's a practical reason. Partnering up with other trusted names is just part of what's necessary here, because the buyer actually has a different kind of set of pre-built ecosystems in their own minds as to who they go to when they want to address business problems. So I think that's another reason why partnerships become necessary, not only from a technology point of view, but from the actual procurement and buying process point of view.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And Jose Antonio, we've already heard a number of compelling reasons here as to why it's so important to have these partnerships. What's your view?
Yes, I would like to introduce an additional factor, that is the possibility of partnering with a tower company. We have different examples where we have been able to successfully partner with the mobile operators. An example could be Telenor in Finland, DNA under the brand of DNA. So we have partnered with them and we provide all our expertise of connectivity. So we join forces to become a stronger player. Also, we're able to deploy the infrastructure on their behalf and provide end-to-end solutions. One of the things that DNA tell us is that partnering with us, they have expanded their technical department to include these private network capability as well. Also, one of the things that we are exploring, and it was mentioned before, is how we can leverage the use of edge computing capabilities, and a telco infrastructure provider has been starting working on that field and how that can be shared, and also to make sure that we approach the market quicker. We have different examples of private networks spaces where we have found a commonality. We have been working already for the past 8 years in the building private networks, and we believe that there's a role for the telco infrastructure providers in the private network space.
Thanks very much, Jose Antonio, and thank you all our panelists. It's very apparent that we do need, or CSPs certainly do need, these partnerships. So to what extent, though, is a successful private 5G partnership strategy actually dependent upon who the customer is? The nature of the vertical they operate in, or the size of the business, or the geographical spread of the business. Robert, what's your thoughts about how partnerships should be applied to customers depending on their unique characteristics?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely essential to have a view of who that end customer is. And that influences the partnering strategy. In geographies that are, for example, very sparsely populated, Australia, Canada, North America, aspects of North America, understanding, focusing on, say, customers who are going to be in things like mining industry, oil and gas, those kind of things, will send you down a certain route of a certain kind of partner with expertise in those verticals. If you're looking at areas that are much more urbanized, and you're looking at serving more densely packed enterprises or SMEs, then again that will take you down a different route of potential partner. So I think Telecom has a slightly interesting habit of lumping all verticals together under the heading of verticals. In fact, they're all different, and so they've got many different needs in there. And even within individual verticals, it varies. If you look at things like logistics and so on, and warehousing, very quickly you get into many different specialisms within those verticals. So I think the partnering on a conscious basis in terms of targeting a particular part of that market is an essential way to do it, rather than just partnering in general and seeing what happens. I think it's got to be an essential part of thinking about how to partner and who to partner with.
Great. Thanks very much, Robert. Yeah, you're right about the verticals. I think we should make a concerted effort to remove the word verticals from our usage. It can lead to all sorts of problems. Jose Antonio, you like to comment about tailoring partnerships to customers?
Yes. In our experience working with the private network space, we see that different customers have their own suppliers, also depending on the vertical. And that gives us the chance to specialize in providing specific solutions for that specific vertical. But not only depending on the vertical, we see that talking to multinationals, different multinationals have different requirements depending on the geography. So, and I always put the same example. Imagine that you're selling burgers and you're a burger chain, and Sometimes you may want to have meat from that specific country and that specific supplier. And that's something that we see more and more in the private network space. Also, we see that sometimes their own vertical or their own enterprise want to be differentiated from the competitor, and you need to do something specifically for them. And that's why we strongly believe in that partnership that brings the knowledge of specific verticals. Let me just give you a couple of examples of areas where we see that companies are specializing. We have a company called EDSCOM, that has been working in a petrol platform in the middle of the Nordic Seas, and they have been specializing in providing connectivity, and that connectivity has provided them a specific expertise, provided the specific requirements that that industry has. So I do believe that a strong specialization is needed, and the customers do need a specific solutions for their specific requirements.
Thanks very much, Jose Antonio. And Beth, would you like to comment too on this issue of who the customer is and the success of the partnerships?
I think it very much depends upon the customer, and I think that there's a number of buckets that it all fits into. So we have customers that are very site focused. So those are customers that have need for private 5G and applications that fit within a site. So, for example, a shipyard, which is a pretty large site, and they're using private 5G to cut their need for huge numbers of access points, because 5G obviously has a wider range for access, and of course they're using it for logistics. And their applications are keeping track of all those shipping containers. But then as Robert and Jose mentioned, mining is another area. We've also had some interesting conversations with companies that do wind farms, which are generally in the middle of the ocean, similar to the Nordic oil and gas platforms. And those, again, have quite specific requirements. But there's a whole other area, which is the facilities management field, where the partners really are the leads rather than the telco as the lead. So they're companies that have HVAC sensors and equipment management type activities, and they want to use private 5G to keep track of all their sensors, but they're using the broader 5G rather than the specific site-based 5G. So I think you really need to think about those as, I wouldn't say two separate industries, but definitely two separate use cases that are quite different.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. And this affects partnerships. It's not, as you say, it's not always about those site-based use cases that are looking to consolidate or reduce access points. There's a lot of different scenarios here with private 5G. Susan, let's come across to you for some comments on this question.
So I think the other thing that's really you need to look at is who's going to be using that network. So, the main portfolio of networks that we have, private networks that we have today, are existing DAS deployments that are now looking to upgrade to 5G. And that's about, bringing the public into their venues. And now they're looking at how do they extend those existing networks then to cover private use cases as well. So I think, there are different segments. The way you're going to solve that problem is going to be very different than what you would do for an industrial location. So I see that as being a big difference between a hybrid network that's providing both public and private, and then those that are really just providing private. So again, it depends on where you're coming from and what problems that you're trying to solve for, because the evolution of those networks and the use cases that you want to support on them are going to be very different.
Thanks, Susan. Well, let's dive into some more examples now, can we? And perhaps we can talk about what works and what doesn't work in terms of partnership approaches and strategies. Can we, first of all, hear from perhaps some of the more successful approaches to telco private 5G networks and how partnerships have played a key role. Jose Antonio, have you got any examples you can share with us of successful partnerships here?
Yes, of course. We have been working, as it was mentioned before, both with the mobile operators and with the specific industries when specific critical communications were required or where most challenging communications are needed. I can give you different examples in different areas. Let me just start, for instance, with the 5G private network that we have installed in the port of Cohen. And there was a specific need on a location of the containers, specific issues with the remote locations of the different containers and the vast territory of where all these containers were. Examples also in industries like MGA in France, where we have installed different private networks to make the factory more efficient. Factories like BASF, the chemical industry company, where we have been able to not only to automate services, but also being able to provide guidance across the entire factory. Other example could be smaller places like circuits, where we have been able to install private networks for testing V2X and 5G connectivity. And also we see, and this is a very interesting move, interest from specific cities. And we started with the city of Tampere in Finland, but we see now more and more cities like Basingstoke and Dean, that is a county in the county of Hampshire, where they are now requesting the installation of private networks for specific service from the city. So these are different examples that we see in the different verticals that tell us that there is a promising future in 5G private network.
Great, thanks very much for those examples. And Susan, did you want to come in with some examples of these successful partnerships that we're seeing so far?
Yeah, I think we've highlighted a number of the partnerships that we've been working with in some of the universities in Germany. I think we were on the Siena booth at Mobile World Congress, showcasing some of the innovations that we've been working with there. And particularly, I would say on integration of some of the sensors for HVAC systems, and really looking then again at the sustainability aspect of this, on how you can use private networks for deploying capabilities of making buildings more green, more sustainable. So I think there's lots of interest in those sorts of partnerships where we can start to look at how we can be more efficient in how buildings are run today.
Great, very encouraging. Thanks, Susan. And Beth, some thoughts from you about successful partnerships?
So one of the most successful partnerships, which goes back a few years, actually pre 5G, is a partnership that we have with a number of utility meters. So companies that do the water meters, the gas meters, the electric meters. We now have a capability we've had for a couple of years to be the network for those meters. And it's done over a private wireless network connection, which of course reduces the potential for sabotage, reduces the potential for hacks, etc., on meters. So that has been a very successful product that we recently signed a very large U.S. utility that has something like 30 million meters that we're going to be connecting to. So I would say that is a very successful partnership where we're partnering with the equipment manufacturers themselves. The partnerships that I'd say have been not as fruitful so far, although that may change in the future, are the ones that are of more general nature, where they're not targeting specific verticals, where there are specific needs, but are more general. Hey, we can do a lot of different use cases, and sort of let's explore what we can do together. And I wouldn't say they've been unsuccessful. I'd just say that it's been a slower start than we had hoped.
Well, this is even the negatives are positive here, Beth, because this is perfect, because it leads very nicely into our next point, which is, what about strategies and partnership approaches that haven't proved so successful? Is there anything we can rule out now? I mean, Beth, you mentioned the more general approaches there, but Susan, are we able at this stage to say that there are some approaches we perhaps shouldn't be pursuing?
I think, we've looked at some of the earlier technologies and building them up in a bespoke manner. And I think that's definitely not a strategy that we think will be successful in the long term. And it's a lot of the learnings that you have from NFV there, everything and pull everything back together again. The lifecycle management aspect of these becomes horrendous. Having to pull everything together, retest it every time you need to do a software upgrade, these sorts of things will not fly. So I think we need to have much better blueprints of the solutions that we're working with partners. And I think scale is a key to success here, in that, having all of these components tested together, lifecycle managed by, an end-to-end on an ongoing basis becomes absolutely critical, because it's not just about the connectivity, it's also about the cloud provider, it's the marketplace that they have there. Those things, I think, are going to be incredibly important. So having one thing that breaks the chain is going to be not acceptable, because I think in many cases these types of deployments are going to be for critical infrastructure. And having downtime is not what anyone will accept, which is why we're looking at 5G and not at Wi-Fi, because they're expecting that level of integration and support that they would typically get through the types of carrier networks that they have experienced in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Good points. Thanks very much, Susan. And Robert, let's come across to you, because you closely monitor this sector. You've got an eye on development. So anything that strikes you as perhaps not a good approach for CSPs to take?
I think in enterprise in general, the approach has very often been a straight kind of resale of third-party technology, into quite simple environments. I think that mode in which the CSP is always the kind of prime, and all your partners are just kind of equipment suppliers, that's probably not going to work that well going forward. I think the needs of enterprises are changing, and also the influence and power and presence of other companies with enterprises means that telcos might need to accept being part of that bigger value chain. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. This is a much bigger pie, and taking a smaller part of it is absolutely fine. So I think the strategy that says, we're just going to be at the top of the pile here, that's probably not going to be effective. Much more collaborative, much more co-creation, and much more accepting that, it might be someone else that leads. And we're certainly seeing that in some of the systems integrators, both very large and much smaller integrators, who are in the lead with customers, and they're pulling in the CSPs to provide components of the solution. So I think that's a factor within this whole opening up of private 5G specifically, is thinking, well, who's in which best place to make the solution for the customer. And telco might be in front, it might be a subcontractor in another context. So as a general rule, I think that mode of strategy is a more productive one.
Great. Thanks very much, Robert. And thanks everyone for examples there and thoughts of what works and what isn't quite working. But what about longevity and stability of partnerships? I mean, should these partnership strategies be locked in and stable over a period of years, or should they be more fluid and adaptive to, the obvious changing market conditions? Are enterprise customers concerned about stability and wanting to see CSPs with long-term relationships, or is it not an important factor for them? Beth, what are your thoughts on this, and what are you seeing?
I'd say it's a mix of both. Telcos do tend to have long relationships with our partners. Our partnership with Cisco probably goes back decades at this point. just as an example. But we're also, Verizon's definitely taking a more innovative approach in recent years, and we have been partnering with smaller companies that, tend to get bought up by other companies. That's certainly happened quite a few times with the partners I've worked with, and so. In many cases, when we're working with our customers, they're more concerned with the partnership, with us as being the stable element, because they know we're not going away, and letting us manage that ecosystem behind the scenes, where the partners, particularly if we're partnering with a smaller company that's very innovative, we can manage that relationship, and kind of protect the customer from that potential instability of that particular partner. And we also frequently work with multiple partners as well. And I'll give you an example. It's not particularly 5G, but our the SD-WAN ecosystem. I've been deeply involved in the SD-WAN portfolio of Verizon for the last 6 years, and it's changed radically, just because the companies themselves have been eaten up or spun out, or whatever. The landscape has shifted quite radically, and what we find with our customers is they're actually, as the technology gets better, the customers are not as brand loyal as you would expect to the SD-WAN vendors. And so they are willing to change vendors, when they do a tech refresh. And they'll say, hey, it looks like this new vendor has kind of leapfrogged in technology right now. So we don't have that sort of rock stable, decades of partnerships like we used to. I'd say things are definitely more fluid.
Thanks very much, Beth. Interesting observations there. That's terrific insights. Susan, what are your thoughts here? Is it sufficient that just one of the partners, the CSP, has been around for a long time and is stable, or is it the partnership themselves that's important to enterprises?
I think it's a combination, as Beth said. I think you're going to have a couple of stable partners there, and I think your CSP and your cloud provider are probably going to be fairly consistent. And then it's going to come down to the applications and the innovation that's happening on top of that, because on these private networks, you're going to be running multitudes of different types of applications that are solving different business problems. So you're going to have parts of the business that care about this particular application, and others that care about something totally different, whether it be housekeeping, whether it be room service, whether it be security. They're all different problems that you're solving with your private network. So I think having that variety on top of your AWS marketplace becomes really, really critical. So they're going to want to stick with that type of relationship, and then they're happy to have that innovation and flexibility on top of that. And I think that these channels will actually really drive a lot of innovation, actually, because they are seeding these companies to help them make their solutions more attractive. So I really do see a lot of innovation coming there. And as Beth said, when you have this innovation, you're going to see companies change. So you will have a couple of stable ones, whether that be, just the service providers. It could be your systems integrators, your cloud providers. They're going to be the ones that are more stable. And then I think you need to have, some fluidity in the rest of your ecosystem to keep the innovation going.
Yeah, great point, Susan. Perhaps that fluidity and dynamic nature of the marketplace is important, and it's more beneficial. Jose Antonio, let's come across to you for some comments on this.
Yes, I share the opinion expressed before by Beth and Sue. It's true that on one side, we see that the customer, when they want to implement a private network, this imply an important change. And for that important change, they need stability. So they need a couple of partners, 2-3 partners to make sure that everything that has been deployed, it will have a length on time. But it's true that as we progress into the years, that solution needs to adjust to specific market conditions. It was mentioned as well on innovation, and needs to provide an evolution of that network. But what we find is that most of these enterprise customers have made an important effort in terms of investment to have a network that only have a stability for a few years. But not only so, most of these networks are intended to cover a specific improvement of the safety in the company, maybe process, maybe automation, maybe hazard monitoring, new communications. And if the company goes that direction, it's hard to change suppliers frequently. Also, we see that one of the reasons as well that they made the decision to go for a private network is accelerating efficiencies. And in that sense, once the company is used to those efficiencies, like short-term setup times when they have a downgrade or a downtime or any failure in the network, something that needs to be improved. And they're used to these because of the efficiency. They don't want to change. And the last thing is, sometimes when you go into the private 5G, you enter in new business models with those corporations. And those business models are based on specific revenue streams or specific costs that are length in time. So you are able to propose different options to make sure that the investment of that company it doesn't penalize the first years, and maybe the cost can come across a set of years. Therefore, I completely agree with what has been said. I think that longer stability is good, but also to be able to adjust to market conditions.
Great. Thanks, Jose Antonio. As you say, it's important to remember that a lot of these relationships will be contract-based and length-based as well. Robert, let's come across to you for thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think a lot to agree with from what we've already heard. I think the context for the enterprise buyer is a little different than in a private 5G context than maybe telcos are used to in dealing with enterprises. I think by nature, it is fundamentally more changeable. And I think that the enterprise buyer will look to reevaluate on a more continuous basis rather than saying, let's pick one provider and stick with that until we 10 years time. I think there's a much greater degree of revalidation, re-questioning. So even on an annual basis, but certainly on a 2 or 3 year basis, to constantly ask the question, are we getting what we need? And to the points that some of the other speakers here have referenced, is this still solving our business problem because the business is moving faster? I think the other thing is, in the context of a discussion about private 5G, fundamentally, 5G introduces a software paradigm, a programmable paradigm into the whole context of networking. And that means that it's an environment that it loves change, it wants change. And so that also changes the way in which we think about the provision of private networks. We're talking about private 5G networks, and they're designed to be changeable. And so they invite that question. So I think yes, there's an understandable degree for stability, and that's essential. But it's against the context of things like business continuity and also security. What's going to maintain our business operations over time, knowing that what's required to do that also evolves on an annual basis. So I think, again, the other speakers have referenced innovation, absolutely essential. And I think getting the balance right as far as CSPs are concerned, their partnership context, is taking that message to your customers. Is how do we provide stability, but also provide innovation at the same time? This shouldn't be an either or. And that's not really what telcos have done over the recent past. They've tended to be not innovative, but rock solid to stability, or innovative and maybe a little less reliable. So I think it's we're in a different space now. So I think the question about is it locked in for years, or is it kind of regularly turned over? It is somewhere in between, but I guess I'm arguing that the context is a little different now because of 5G specifically.
Yeah, thanks very much, Robert. There's a lot for CSPs to be aware of. We've just got time for one final question, and I'll try and make this quick if I can, because we've been talking about private 5G partnership strategies. But does an existing edge partnership automatically make an ideal private 5G partnership strategy as well? Or should CSPs consider them as completely separate? Jose Antonio, let's come to you for thoughts on this.
So from our perspective, it's essential to include edge computing in the 5G offer. Let me just give you examples of how we face the customer. So when we go and talk to the customers, they sometimes you approach the technical IT director or one of the CTOs of the company, and sometimes they do not know why they need a private network. They understand the concept of a private network, some of the benefits, but one of the key aspects of why a 5G private network compare with 4G is moving beyond the communication that can 4G provide. And edge computing enables that. We see that sometimes the corporations may want to have the brain closer to them and have the possibility to have edge computing capabilities to enable some of the more advanced functionalities for their private network. We see things like digital twin to enable those digital twins, everything that has a higher reliability, things like control assets remotely, also things related to latency, how quickly the network needs to react. Sometimes we see that edge computing enables that, and we see that as something linked, 5G and edge computing, and therefore we understand that those two concepts are linked together.
Okay, thanks, Jose Antonio. So don't overlook the edge is the message there. Susan, would you agree with that sentiment?
Absolutely. I think most of the applications that we're going to see deployed on these private networks are going to come through, marketplaces of cloud providers. So, we're working very closely with cloud providers. We have, one of the world's first Gravitron outposts deployed in a private network today, just to tap into those types of ecosystems. So I do think that you can't have a private network strategy without a cloud strategy because they are so intrinsically linked. And I think that, the CSPs already have those edge partnerships in place. So, regardless of the channel where enterprises are going for their private networks, that's going to be a key feature in any of their buying decisions.
Great, thanks very much, Susan. So keep working on those edge partnerships whilst you're developing the private 5G partnerships as well. Right, well, we must leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for taking part in our discussion today and sharing your views with us. And if you're watching this on day 2 of our private 5G and the Edge Summit, then please send us your questions and we'll try and answer them in our live Q&A show, which is coming up very soon. And don't forget to view the other panel discussion and the keynote interviews from this year's summit. For now though, thanks for watching and goodbye.